APA, Citing Sources, Avoiding Plagiarism. Dear students, while doing research, we are citing a lot of sources like primary and secondary sources, like web sources and then manual sources, published and unpublished sources, directories, encyclopedias, theses, newspapers, periodicals, magazines. So a lot of sources are to be managed and to be cited, right? So while doing that, and particularly while using APA style, we are required to avoid plagiarism because this plagiarism is an academic offense, and that is something which is unacceptable in academic circles, right? So we must be choosing an appropriate documentation style and avoid plagiarism. So while using APA style, we are required to cite references and document sources. Okay, so in APA we cite quotations and borrowed ideas, right? We can take quotations from the sources, and we can borrow ideas from sources with an appropriate manner by providing the page numbers and then documenting the source at the end. Okay, so enclosing borrowed language in quotation marks. So if we are quoting directly from any source, we must be enclosing the borrowed language in quotation marks. So that's a requirement by APA documentation style. And then putting summaries and paraphrases in your own words. When you are referring to something in the form of summary or a paraphrase, then you are actually required to use your own words. That's the APA style. And then if you are using a software like EndNote, then it's something which would really make you comfortable because in EndNote there are features that you can cite while writing down, and the feature is called cite while you write, right? So that's the feature, which is a wonderful feature, and it is also now coming as an inbuilt form in Microsoft Word file. So if you're working in Word, you can also go to the button which is given on the top, and the name of the button is references. So in the references, there is a small button with the EndNote or EN, right? So EN stands for EndNote. So you can also use it from your Microsoft Word file, right? And that's something which is really helpful. So you should know that your research paper is basically a collaboration between you and your sources. So that collaboration is really important. And how would you know that it is plagiarism? You should know that there are 3 acts which are considered plagiarism in doing research, and particularly while managing sources, managing information. Okay, so those 3 acts are when you are failing to cite quotations and borrowed ideas, right? So you must be using quotation marks. If you are failing to do that, you are actually doing plagiarism. That's number 1. The second is when failing to enclose borrowed language in quotation marks, right? So the first point is that you must be citing, and the second point is that you must be using quotation marks for borrowed language for quotation directly. And number 3rd is that when you are failing to put summaries and paraphrases in your own words, right? So if you are failing to do any of these 3, you are actually committing plagiarism, right? So you must be avoiding plagiarism by citing quotations and those borrowed ideas. You must be citing. Then if you are quoting directly, you must be using those quotation marks. And if you are using summaries and paraphrases, then you must be using your own words, right? And for all these, you are actually citing the sources. And do you know why do we cite sources? There are basically 2 reasons for which we cite sources. Number 1, if our readers are interested in actually reading further from the original source, so they can go to that source. So the information of the source is given to the readers. That's reason number one. And the second reason is to give credit to the authors from whom you are actually using the ideas, right? So number one, to facilitate your readers for further reading. And number two, to give credit to those contributors, to those authors who actually worked on those ideas, right? So these are the points, these are the tips you would be doing in order to avoid plagiarism while citing sources.